Hey folks, my name's Ty. I'm the chair of the outreach committee at Comradery, and we wanted to record an update this month so you could see where we're at, what milestones we've accomplished to get closer to alpha, and what milestones we still need to hit in the different major areas that we're working on right now. So I'm going to check in with the chair of each of the leadership committees, and we're going to talk about what things that we've done so far and what things we've got coming up next.
My name is John Dorsey. My pronouns are they, them, and my position is the chair of the Good and Welfare Committee.
Not only is the Good and Welfare Committee in charge of moderation, but we also set up the Good and Welfare Committee to really be a centralized way to make sure that creator safety and creator accountability is at the highest priority in ways that is just really not a priority in other platforms. So John has been taking a serious look at how we're going to do that and been setting up some specific processes on how that's going to happen.
So for us, it was very important to make sure that when we were building this platform, that we were making sure that from day one, we were trying to create something that was safe for everybody involved, and that people who typically uh, don't have a say or are often ignored, that they now have the avenues to address those concerns. Because just because we have the platform in a certain way doesn't mean everybody's going to follow it. So it's not just inclusivity and safety, it is also accountability and restorative justice. Where we are right now, we are currently in the process of updating the bylaws. We kind of have a draft that we set out to really go over. But what we're doing currently is we're making sure that the processes for things like committee meetings, member meetings, the way that people engage, that we have the process set forth for how people are to engage, right? This isn't just sort of like your, terms of agreement that allow you just kind of click agree and go on with. When people come on, we make sure that there is training and that these are things that are communicated very directly and very clearly. The Good and Welfare Committee's other role is to move with the platform as it goes through that growing process to constantly update and how these things are going to sort of unfold upon itself. Things are going to come through the Good and Welfare Committee, so making sure that the Good and Welfare Committee can take on that kind of influx of requests that people may have. How do you mitigate between, say, like two creators having a disagreement versus actual harm that is being committed? When harm is committed, here's the pathway that is to be taken to rectify that harm and to make kind of amends. And what is expected of people when they are engaging with the platform itself, both in terms of being a creator and as well as being sort of supporters as well. So, really, what we're doing, we want to make sure that we are forward thinking and proactive in that regard.
Next, I asked John what's next for the Good and Welfare Committee and what still needs to happen leading up to the alpha release.
As we kind of build towards our alpha release, the Good and Welfare Committee, we are really looking forward to having our bylaws, our charter, code of conduct in a really solid place before we really open this up to more people. Because again, like I said, day one, we want to make sure that we at least have a strong foundation to build upon as bring more people on. Now, that being said, as we are bringing people on, you know, as Andre 3000 always says, you can plan a pretty picnic, but you can't predict the weather. It's probably going to be a little bit slow going in the beginning. So that's why we're excited to get that going and see what sort of blind spots that we may have, but also what strengths that we have and how good this is really going to be for the people coming on.
For our good and welfare system to actually work, we need the site to be up and running. So I checked in with Majed on where the technology is at for things like account creation, payment processing, and when we can expect to have the website up in the alpha phase.
I'm Majed Elass. I am the current chair of the Tech and Design Committee. The Tech and Design Committee has currently been working on the the new site that we plan on launching. We have also worked on what everybody has seen so far for the current Comradery site. Right. So we're planning on working on an MVP, which is minimal viable product. So ensuring that the features that people want are placed on the next push that we do for the site. So a very bare bones functioning site we asked what people were looking for specifically. So we're making sure that we account for all these things. So there's going to be like a pre-alpha and then the alpha. And then from that moving forward, there's going to be, far more robust features that we kind of catalog and ensure that everybody is asking for specific things is placed in our backlog and kind of prioritized. Yeah, so what we're planning on doing for the pre-alpha is showing that, we can ensure that we can take donations securely, efficiently, in a way that is also as easy as possible. So we want to make sure that our user base feels confident when we open that feature up to them too. So that's the goal for our Coco MVP pre-alpha. So what we're hoping to achieve is to allow people to create their own projects, have multiple creators on projects, also allow those projects to have supporters and have those supporters pay through their credit card as an example, and then it also ensured that those projects can also create blog posts. I think those are kind of the core features. And, as I said before, as we move on, we'll ensure that we add more features moving forward.
A lot of the reason it makes sense to come together as a cooperative instead of each creator running their own website is the way that the finances work. Things like sales tax compliance, payment processing. It's much cheaper, much more efficient. It takes a lot less work for each person for us to come together to do that instead of doing that separately. So I talked to Cade, the chair of the Treasury Committee, about what the status is on our research and implementation of our financial process. Basically, how's the money working?
My role currently at Comradery is the Treasury Committee chair. And in a general sense, what my responsibilities have been thus far are to begin to understand and then begin to create systems that will guide us through a whole host of different legal compliance and financial compliance issues that we'll have to deal with along the way. So more specifically, we've been figuring out and designing what our bookkeeping and accounting processes will look like, to where it is streamlined and easy to teach and to operate in a cooperative setting as possible. And at the same time, trying to figure out what our legal, especially our tax liability system is going to look like. The response to our initial call for support, for financial support, was pretty awesome. It was like a lot more than we expected. And because we didn't necessarily ask for any fundraising goals, the response was amazing. And we ended up, to this day, we have gotten $3,820.11 from donations. All the donations that we've received are going towards our normal operating costs, which nobody at the moment, nobody is being paid. None of the member owners or workers on Comradery are being paid. So all that money is going towards mostly subscriptions for services that we need to operate. The other big one, we have chosen or created a recommendation for the rest of the cooperative as to the best sales tax compliance software for our organization, and we have begun the process of entering that into that partnership with the business that we've chosen on that, and figuring out how that's going to work moving forward, which is going to be one of the most complicated and expensive things for the first year.
I asked Cade to follow up a little bit on this question of the sales tax compliance software, because I know it's been a major sticking point with getting the platform set up, that the laws have changed around sales tax, and a lot of people watching this will know that that affected Patreon really heavily. So I asked Cade to elaborate a little bit on this, on what does this change in U.S. sales tax mean for us?
Basically, in 2018, there was a Supreme Court case, I believe North Dakota v. Wayfair, that really, the result of that case created this instrumental change in how sales tax is done for marketplace facilitators in the United States. But in a very general sense, most states have distinctions in how they tax donation revenue and how they tax sales revenue. And then a lot of states also have distinctions between whether they tax digital goods or physical goods or both. And then some states will tax services. And in the case of Comradery, that's not really going to come into play at all. We're mostly going to be dealing with the taxation of digital goods, maybe eventually physical goods, and then also donations. We as an organization, Comradery, we're paying for sales tax compliant software, and part of the money that we'll be paying for that is coming out of dues, but there will be no added cost for creators that will be paying for any of this. At the end of the day, it will be much cheaper than probably even hiring one full-time accountant. Actually, yes, definitely much cheaper than hiring one full-time accountant. So that's a really big part of it. Another part of it is that we want to have a treasury committee and sort of a financial and legal system inside of Comradery that is understandable and accessible to the people who are part of the cooperative who are involved in that committee, right? And so we don't love the idea of just kind of like giving it all to an outside accountant that we pay and then like not really understanding what's going on. And it would probably be hard to find an accountant who would be willing to work within the confines of how we do our decision-making process. It's very different than how normal accountants would operate. So this is seeming like the cheapest and most effective way for whoever is a part of the committee to understand what's going on and be a part of the process of carrying these things out, but also make it really easy to understand and make sure that it gets done every month so we don't get into any kind of legal trouble. So we currently do not have enough funding or enough donations to cover the sales tax compliant software that we're going to need to purchase by the time that we launch as a platform, which we're hoping to be the first of the year.
So like Cade said, creator dues are going to pay for the software for tax compliance and anything else that needs to be paid for on a regular basis. But before we have that dues income to cover this, we have to pay for TaxJar, the tax compliance software, ahead of time for the first year. We've already gotten a great number of donations, almost $4,000, and we really appreciate everybody pitching in. What you're going to be seeing soon is that we're going to set a specific goal to raise that money ahead of launch, and we're going to be asking people to kick in a little bit more to get us to that point. None of this donation money is paying any salaries. None of it is paying any stipends. It's just going to the costs that are going to be covered by dues for site upkeep to get us kickstarted. So if you want to pitch in, we'd really appreciate it. And we're going to be communicating more about this donation drive in the near future to help us get to that goal. We checked in with John with the Good and Welfare Committee, Majed with the Tech Committee, Cade with the Finance Committee, and we looked at all different ways that the platform is coming together and how we're moving towards the alpha launch early in 2021. The last person we're going to check in with is a new face who joined us recently and is heading up the steering committee. Alana's skill is in parliamentary procedure. It's in a lot of very careful checking on democratic processes, and the steering committee is keeping an even hand on the keel to make sure that we are building our processes fairly, if we are really planning our steps in the correct way. So we're going to check in with Alana here and see how the steering committee's work is going.
My name's Alana. I am a labor organizer and musician here in Seattle, and I am the chair of the steering committee. So some of the things I've worked on so far are reviewing the bylaws. Our bylaws, I think, are in a pretty good state. They need some fleshing out for consistency and things like that. Also, I am developing the code of conduct, which I think every organization should begin with one. I don't think that a democratic organization can exist effectively without one. And developing the democratic structure and process of the organization. So how things like meetings will be conducted, how decisions will be made, to be the most equitable among everyone in the organization. I'm a rules nerd. I love process. I love good process because I've seen so much bad process. While democracy lifts everyone's voices, a lot of times folks will see it as producing more conflict. It actually produces a lot more equitable results in the long run. And while organizing, I've also found a lot of what does and doesn't work in terms of even things like meeting process, like making sure everyone's voice is heard in a meeting. Because if you don't have a structure like that, you'll end up with people with the loudest voices speaking the most and not keeping in mind things like axes of oppression when you're figuring out who has decision making power. What organizing has best taught me about this is how to make decisions effectively, how to make decisions equitably, and how to develop a structure that doesn't end up getting mired in itself. I guess just like seeing how the website has developed and like how things have moved even since I joined has been really neat, like the way it's building on itself. The bottom up structure is a big way that I think it's different because I think that just lends itself toward justice anyway. And again, building in that process to make sure everyone gets as equitable airtime as possible with those, again, axes of oppression in mind. It is fundamentally a collaborative thing. So, my priorities right now for the steering committee coming towards Alpha is making sure that our bylaws are something that works for every other area of the organization. We can't we can't do things like neglect outreach in the bylaws and favor good and welfare too much or vice versa. And also making sure that our code of conduct is both n- not too loose and not too tight. If it's too vague, you end up with confusion. If it's too tight, you end up with, for lack of a better phrase, rules lawyering. So making sure that the code of conduct both makes sense and is something that is something that folks feel they can follow. If folks are nervous about stepping over the code of conduct just because there are so many things to trip over, it's not effective. So my priorities are primarily getting that the our rules, our guidelines, our process, something that everyone is both comfortable with and that will lend itself well to being effectively democratic.
So here's the bottom line for what's happening next and what that means for you. We are really excited that we're going to be able to show off a working prototype of the technology in the next few weeks. And we're going to start having conversations and shopping around the draft of the bylaws to start getting feedback on that. And finally, like I mentioned before, we're going to be raising some money to cover some of the compliance, legal, tax software, that we need in order to move closer to alpha and be able to launch with the first group of creators early in the year. So stay tuned, keep an eye on the mail list, and if you want to ask any questions, just reach out at info@comradery.co. I'll catch you later.